I've said this before, but it is worth repeating because people often ask me, "Well, why do you look at this website, Conservative Home?" And today, I think this really justifies the exact reason why we look at this website, Conservative Home. It is a very, very influential in the non-parliamentary Conservative Party. It has regular votes, and those votes regularly do influence the decisions of the parliamentary Conservative Party. This website is very, very influential. And as a result, you get a lot of Conservative MPs, a lot of think tanks, and a lot of thought pieces put to the conservative voting UK public as to what they think they should be thinking, or at least trying to put ideas forward. And of course, one of the many writers in Conservative Home is, of course, none other than my favorite Brexit quote of all time, Mr. Daniel Hannan. And of course, his famous quote, because it always is worth repeating, that when asked if a vote for leave meant that the UK was going to leave the European Union, Daniel Hannan, aka the brain of Brexit, as he was cast at the time, said that only a fool would vote to leave the single market and customs union, and that a vote to leave was not to leave that specific term. So yeah, so we have lots of fun with with good old Dan every so often, and he has done, or at least provided us with more fun today. Because according to Dan, these new expenses claims scenario kerfuffle that is going on at the moment is nothing to worry about. It's just, these expenses claims, they're just trivial things. It's damaging our politics. How could you bring up this accountability to the public for spending our money? Oh, so yeah, let's go diving into this because this is quite fun. It just goes to show you how Dan once again completely misses the mark when it comes to something like this. So let's go diving into this. But before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and an updation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. You can join, which also does help support the channel. And of course, do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you are again new to the channel. And of course, do remember to ring the bell so you get notifications about the channel as well. So, as always, let's go cracking on with this. So, we go to Conservative Home with one Daniel Hannan with the title of How Labour Conflicting a Trivial Row Over Ministerial Expenses Damages Politics. So, talking to this, all these expenses claims that we've seen very recently, they're just damaging politics. This damaging it. So I guess Dan's okay then with Nadeem Zawawi claiming all that money to heat his horse's stables. Or many of what was the infamous one, like back in the day? Didn't an MP like buy a duck house and use this as an expenses claim? I think back in the day. So that's the big problem. We should be shocked that ministers are using, taxpayers' money on very often what is expenses claims they can never justify. But there you go. So there is something almost unbearably stupid about these rows over ministerial expenses. Really stupid. A lot of people care about these things, Dan. I think that's why you've written this in response to try and, keep this down, because these expensive claims do just show you just how little really, unfortunately, some MPs do care about their position, that they should be, careful when, spending this, expenses claim money. Of course, there have been talks in the past of maybe putting caps on some expenses claims and saying, there's certain things they cannot claim for. And of course, it's always been heavily fought against by none other than the Conservative Party. So there you go. But anyway, so this week, Labour's Anya Rayner invited us to be shocked at the truth that, at the fact that Rishi Sunak stayed in an expensive hotel in Venice when, as Chancellor, he attended the G20's Finance Summit, Ministers' Summit there. Sunak was the most prominent in an itinerary of supposed abominations, and ministers were, as Rayner assured us, living the high life, while families up and down the country were sick with anxiety. So, what is wrong with this style of attack? Dan asks. Almost everything. No, Rayner actually has this very, very spot on. How can an MP in who might have constituents that are constantly worrying about the cost of living crisis, worrying about can they heat their homes, can they even potentially afford this month's meals before they get paid again, worrying about their rent. This goes to show you just how out of touch Dan really is with the man on the street at this stage. But given the fact, of course, Daniel's claim that, of course, the vote for Brexit was a vote against the elites, as they've always said, Brexit was never about that. But here we go. So, what does Dan find wrong with this? Why is this all wrong? So, for one thing, it is false. Does Labour seriously want us to believe that Sunak went into politics for the money? Probably so. Lots of MPs do. There is such thing now in this day and age as the career politician, that people do go into politics for the career. Is that a problem? I mean, not really. I mean, some people do see it as a problem, but really, if people want to go into politics, I've got no problem with people going into politics or wanting to be a politician. Good for them, But of course, I would like to see, I think, a more wider range of people go into politics, not just people who essentially can afford to go into politics. So, but back to it. So, the richest man in the House of Commons saw the G20 summit chiefly as an opportunity just for a nice jaunt, that he would not have rather spent the weekend at home with his young daughters. Yeah, it might have been a nice jaunt for him. I don't know. Does Dan have a quote from Rishi Sunak about that? I mean, of course, it was the G20. He would be, expected to go as a minister to represent the UK, but spending much money to sort of lavish himself in that hotel, maybe when there could have been maybe a better, more cost-effective option. Just saying, guys, maybe that stuff should be thought about. But anyway, it continues. When these high-level conferences happen, the chief delegates are automatically allocated rooms in the main hotel. The logistics and security arrangements for the host country would otherwise be a nightmare. And the thing is, that's fine. That's done for a reason. But again, they still have to pay for said hotels. And of course, if that was just what it was, but I think, to be honest, it's more than this. And you notice he's only focusing on some very core ones here. So, for what it's worth, our politicians are remarkably, quote, low maintenance by global standards. After the coalition took over in 2010, ministers were widely amused when having to travel to EU summits with the economy class airfares they would find their counterparts from other states that were just bailing out arrived by private jet. Of course, that was one of the things that was, countenanced, but of course, that hasn't really stopped. And sometimes, fine, if they want to take a private jet, depending on where they're the country they're coming from, maybe having to charter a private jet might be the closest thing. But some countries do actually have their own personal private jet. In fact, the UK, one of the things that Boris Johnson wanted to do was to get a, Air Force One type of jet up and running for, the Prime Minister's, personal use. If you remember that whole scenario. So he continues, but of course, no one is interested in the detail. It's not about the detail, it's about the amount of money that MPs claim as expenses when they are already paid quite a lot. I mean, can't they pay it for themselves, or maybe like, maybe claim like 20% back, or something like that? There's a lot of things people have said that we could do to check this massive spending that MPs have when it comes to expenses. So Rayner's diatribe, nice wording there, Dan, is aimed at those who begin with the assumption that every Conservative MP is a spiv who is always looking for ways to sustain that prejudice. There are plenty of examples of MPs. Again, Nadeem Zawawi and his horse stables. What does Dan think of that particular expense claim? I would really like to know. The trouble is that if you whip up outrage against ministers, people don't respond by saying, quote, bloody Tories. They respond by saying bloody politicians, which weakens the legitimacy of our entire system of representative government. And I do agree that, again, it's not just some of these expensive claims have been, as Conservatives, we've also seen some Labour MPs have that as well. We've seen these types of things, but some of them have tried to, justify this. I know there's one, was it Angela Rayner with the AirPods? I think she said in response to that, well, look, I need a pair of earphones for my work. These aren't, for my own, personal use. These are included in my work. I need those for, work purposes. So if she wants to sort of claim that and say, that's why I've gone for those those particular AirPods. In fact, I think he might bring it up later. Then yeah, okay, fine. But there are lots of expenses that have been completely unjustifiable. Again, Nadeem Zawawi, and I think there are others out there now floating around that we've seen that are completely unjustifiable. And we have seen that it has been Conservatives the past couple of years who have been making the biggest amount of expensive claims. Some of them haven't even been ministers. I think, what is it? Is it the guy in Nottingham? I think there's one of the Nottingham Conservative MPs. I think it is. I can't remember the top of my head. His expenses claims were just absolutely insane. And you're like, you're not a minister. What exactly are you claiming for when you're doing all this? And that's taxpayers' money. We should be caring about what is done by this. So, Rayner knows this. The reason the information she compiled publicly was available was that the Conservatives had insisted on a greater degree of transparency than did the Blair government, which introduced departmental credit cards. There is no partisan advantage to be had here. Sure enough, within the hours, attention had switched to why Rayner felt obliged to bill the taxpayer over £249 for a pair of personalised AirPods. For what it's worth, Rayner's defence struck me as completely justified. Pressed on why she had not gone for a cheaper model, she declared, I wouldn't say that it's luxury to have computer equipment. That is everyday expenditure for somebody that works with computers every day for their job. Quite, and attending a summit as a minister, just as is their job, are using AirPods for a Zoom interview. It is dishonest to say, in effect, that my expenses are essential to my work, but yours are living high on the hog. But the thing is, Dan's not addressing all these complaints that we have seen time and time again. I have to wonder, is he going to bring up Nadeem Zawawi and his expenses claim for, again, heating his horse's stables? Again, I'm bringing up that as the main one, but there are thousands of others that have come out recently of claims that Conservative MPs, again, it is the Conservative MPs that are claiming the most back. And again, in the case of the guy that I mentioned, I think he's from Nottingham, spending the most. He's not even a front bencher. He's been a backbencher for years. What's his excuse for claiming all this? And yeah, I think any expense claim should have to be justified. Now, fair enough, if you're traveling, computer equipment, yeah, fine, there are justifiable expenses. But what about Nadeem Zawawi claiming to, heat his horse's stables, or as we've seen sometimes, claiming for second homes, when one of the things that we actually do provide as a taxpayer, we do actually provide accommodation for MPs. Now, fair enough, if you've ever actually seen that accommodation, it is quite Spartan, and it probably does actually deserve to be, at least done up a bit to bring up to, so we say, more modern standards. But part of the reason why it hasn't is because no MP actually ever use it. Um, of course, you can see the reason why if you've ever sort of looked into it. But again, there you go. But anyway, where are we? True. Some people's definition of corruption correlates with more than less 100% withholding the view with what they disagree. Perhaps Rayner is in this category herself and generally believes that there is a difference between the Labour expenses, necessary, proportionate, and evidence of hard work, and the Tory expenses, treating the taxpayers like a cash machine, which, again, they absolutely have seemed to be doing that optic-wise. Even, they're trying to shift the blame. Oh, look, Rayner's all on this. Rayner's attacking us for all this, but look at what Rayner did. Don't think so. Or perhaps she is just cynically aiming her remarks at others who think it's in fashion. Either way, it's weakened the respect for our parliamentary democracy. So why aren't we doing about it something, Dan? Why aren't you committing an idea to how we can maybe rein in these expenses? What's your suggestion to solve this, Dan? Oh, well, Dan doesn't have any suggestion because, again, traditionally, when we have seen moves to stop this or anything like that, it has very much been the vast majority of Conservative MPs who have moved to stop these changes from happening. Anyway, it continues. Shall I tell you what annoys me the most? It is the way that these arguments over these relatively trivial sums, again, some of them are not relatively trivial sums, distract attention from the vast amounts that our government machinery is still needlessly spending on our out, despite the lockdown debt and the continuing deficit and the supposed need for tax rises. Of course, oh, we're too big as a government. Daniel Han's spewing that line. Of course he is. I've lamented in past comments that nationally the Conservative government continues to issue boastful numbers as if spending were more intrinsically notorious. Bringing a note that I did before a BBC interview last year that was a series of self-styled spending increases of 560 million on adult math skills, 170 million on apprenticeships, 335 million on street lighting, 625 million on border technology. Again, what did that border technology money get spent on? I don't know. We'll see. Has this tendency even slowed since Jeremy Hunt began raising taxes on the grounds that there is no more fat left to cut, or contraire, as we old Brussels hands used to say? Again, if you have big government, well, then you need to spend money on it. And of course, if you want to shrink the size of the government, then it should be up to people like Dan saying, well, actually, the government is no longer going to fulfill this role. And of course, that is what they would love to say openly, but of course, they daren't say it openly because then people would realize, oh, hang on, the government's no longer sort of do that. I mean, come on. You're literally saying 350 million on street lighting. That's kind of important to the public good, we need street lighting because it's also, a public, public safety, risk if you don't have proper street lighting. But there you go. So I'm typing these words after bumping into my dedicated and ingenious, I hope that's how you say it, local MP Kit Malthouse. He has just compiled a list of something of spending announced in the previous 24 hours. This comprised of over 70 million on net zero emission ferries, 200 million on active travel, 32.5 million on a red diesel replacement, 230 million on local football, 32 million on upgrading heat networks, 110 million on guilt-free flights, 81 million on self-driving buses, 29 billion on the Know Your Neighbour Fund. Does this strike you as a government that is cutting every penny to bring spending closer to pre-pandemic levels? How many more such 24-hour periods can we afford? Well, I'd say all those are pretty important. I mean, yeah, we need to go towards net zero. I think getting net zero ferries probably an important part considering how much, the UK as an island uses ferries, active travel. Again, this needs to be heavily, really seriously invested in having more, alternatives to jumping in your car, buses, public transport, trains. We've been over that millions of times. Again, red diesel replacement. Again, that's targeting farmers. That's good. Again, helps the environment. Again, local football. That's meant to be leveling up, Dan. I thought you'd be in favour of such a a fund, but hey, there you go. Again, upgrading the heat networks. Are you telling me Dan seriously thinks that's not a valid spend at this moment in time? Guilt-free flights. Again, I don't know what he means by guilt-free flights, so I can't really comment on it, but whatever. Self-driving buses, yeah, those will be interesting because it depends where they put these self-driving buses and what you mean. I'd rather more, shall we say, investment seen in sort of tram networks. Tram networks have been proved to be certainly a better alternative in some cities, but self-driving buses, again, would be fun. And then I've no idea what the Know Your Neighbor Fund is, but I'm sure Dan disagrees with it somehow. So there might be, again, when you look into it, probably an actual reason good to why we're spending this. So, on all such profligacy, I hope that's how you say it, the opposition says nothing. Well, probably because they recognize that spending the money on some of those things is actually quite good. Maybe they've got disagreements with how that money is spent, where, it really needs to go, but that's fine. Starmer has no intention of reducing any of this spending. On the contrary, he wants more of it, funded by wealth taxes and windfall taxes. Yet Labour finds time to pretend to be upset about a £318 hotel bill. God, how depressing. I think it was significantly more than that, Dan. I think that's why people are so upset about it. But there you go. And if it is only £318, and Rishi Sunak is the most wealthiest politician, could he not pay for it himself? After all, I think someone as wealthy as Rishi Sunak for a £318 hotel bill is merely pocket change to someone like him. But there you go. And of course, in the comments, it's kind of funny. Not many people are with him on this, actually calling him out, saying that he is massively out of touch. So it's always interesting to see the comments of what are in response to some of these articles, because very often I've been noticing recently, bear in mind, this is meant to be the big sort of piece to sort of, the Conservative non-parliamentary party. Very often you see some of these comments, they're very, very much against the Conservative Party and what's being put out in some of these pieces. And to be honest, in those comments, there's not one comment speaking out in favor of Daniel Hannan saying that, oh, he's right about this. Everyone's calling him out saying how wrong he is on this. So, yeah. And like I say, there are more expenses. I mean, I'd love to know what Daniel Hannan thinks to the Nadeem Zahawi claim, for heating his horse's stables. And there are a number of other MPs. Like I say, I think it's the Nottingham one, I think, or at least one of the Nottingham Conservative MPs. Not even a minister, yet he's the most highest expense claiming MP there is. Never been a frontbench minister his entire life. What's he spending all this? What's he claiming all this money for? So yeah, Dan here, very well, truly out of touch. But it's often funny to see, Hannan come forward and write pieces like this, because it just goes to show you how out of touch he really is with not only, the common, person on the street, but even his own Conservative audience here, or at least what is meant to be, writing to a friendly Conservative audience, is actively turning against him, saying that they disagree with what he's written. So that's highly interesting, certainly from point of view on that. But as always, bringing you the best comedy from Conservative Home. So thank you very much, as always, for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee. And again, all the extra links down below. You know the drill by now. As always, guys, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.